The Comeback Christmas by Melinda Curtis. Part of the multi-author Heartwarming Christmas Town series. Chapter 1. Theodore Lincoln could not screw up. If he did, he'd let down the 10 previous generations who'd run the family apple farm and the 3 living generations expecting a Lincoln family Christmas with all the bells and whistles. Everyone, dead or alive, expected Ted to make the right decisions. But there was a glut of apples on the market driving the price down. Last year's crop had barely covered the taxes, much less a living for Ted, his younger sister Abigail, his parents or Uncle Ben. Abigail was on a crash course to ruin her 18-year-old life and the future for her 2-year-old daughter Lizzie. And Lizzie? She deserved Christmas to be magical. Big tree. Sparkly lights. And presents. Credit card bending presents. Ted shouldn't have been standing in front of the Wright grist mill on the outskirts of Christmas Town, Maine, on Thanksgiving afternoon, thinking about taking out a home equity loan to expand the farm. But there he stood, thinking, stressed like a sprawling sleeping giant in his gut. Well, if it isn't Teddy Lincoln. Not her. Not her. Not her, not her, not her. Ted popped an antacid, and then turned to face her. Chloe Wright was the only person who called him Teddy anymore. She'd had a crush on him since she was in the 3rd grade and he in the 4th. Back then she was a non-stop talker. Nerd to the nth degree. Overbite. Brillo copper curls. Belly fat. Dress her in green tights and a pointed red cap and she could have been a stand-in for a garden gnome. She'd followed him around like a puppy. Through braces and bras and middle school. The other boys in Christmas Town made fun of her. And of him. Ted had wanted her to be struck by lightning. Dropped into a manhole. Teleported into another dimension. And then, on the first day Chloe entered high school, a day Ted had been dreading, he turned at the sound of her laughter and realized she wasn't a roly-poly puppy with an overbite. She was tall and curvy and word-stealing pretty. Her smile was worth every penny her adoptive parents had paid. And her hair, she'd straightened and tamed it. It looked touchably soft. Every guy in high school bent over backward for her attention. Every guy but Ted. By then, he'd treated her like dirt for so long, he couldn't swallow his pride and regret and be nice to her. For her part, she treated him as if he were dead. And who could blame her? Ted turned to face her now, ignoring the way stress banged awake in his belly. There was the beauty he knew so well. The long, tamed curls. The bright blue eyes. The temptingly smooth skin. But physical attributes had never outshone her personality, the optimism, the wry humor, the kindness underlying the thick skin she'd developed. I was sorry to hear about your father, Chloe. A local businessman, Harold Wright, had died a few months ago after a long battle with bone cancer. They tell me we all have to go sometime. Her optimism had faded, he thought, her humor turned to sarcasm. She shaded her eyes from the sun gleaming off snow and the worn walls of the mill. He was a good man. She tromped through the drifts, moving closer to the mill, studying it as if it held an answer to a confounding question. Or held a memory she wasn't sure how to categorize. Words came to mind: perfect, mind-blowing, once-in-a-lifetime magical. She spared Ted a half-glance as she passed. That glance said what she thought of him: disappointing, hurtful, liar. You got divorced, she said, as if she'd only recently caught up on ancient history. Possible, since she'd been living in Boston the past 9 years. But it was more likely she was taking this chance to clear the air, since they hadn't spoken to each other alone in nearly a decade. About 10 years ago, he'd been a senior in high school and Chloe a junior. They'd been briefly unattached to others at the same time. Things had happened. Ted stared up at the mill, which sat at a bend in the river and had a magnificent old water wheel. Who could have predicted the two of them? Together? After all those years? Saying I love you. Hearing it back. Feeling as if this was meant to be. As if they were meant to be. But they weren't. Ted's ex-girlfriend, Gwen, announced she was pregnant the next day. And Ted knew what he had to do. He had to break Chloe's heart, as well as his own. Maybe if Ted hadn't grown up in a small town, maybe if he wasn't next in line to lead the Lincoln family, maybe if Chloe would have asked, he'd have done something different. Maybe. Instead, he'd married Gwen a few weeks later after high school graduation. I had to do what I thought was right. I knew it wasn't true love, he said now. Gwen's hair wasn't as red as Chloe's. Her smile not as bright. Her heart not as loyal. A month later, she miscarried. I'm sorry about the baby. Chloe marched up the stone steps, as if intent upon pushing open the door to the past and going inside. She stopped before the 8-foot-tall, double wooden doors and faced him instead. But you chose honor over true love. Her tone was accusing, the same as it had that morning all those years ago. What good is love if you cast it aside when things get tough? Her words came back to him, filled with the hurt of a child given up for adoption. Ted released a breath. There was a right thing, and there was you and me. I couldn't have both. He carefully avoided mentioning true love. Was there such a thing? Gwen had pledged her love, but all she did was complain about the lack of money and lie. She'd left him for a cross-country truck driver on their 3rd wedding anniversary. Most lessons are learned the hard way. Chloe opened her mouth to say more, he deserved the more part, but then she shut it, and traipsed back down the steps, heading toward the grove of pines separating her dad's house from the mill. Goodbye, Teddy. Speed was one of Chloe's strengths. When she saw a great deal, she swooped in. Sometimes with stellar results, like the time she'd bought the hot dog cart in college, and sometimes with disastrous ones, like the car wash chain she'd bought right before a water-restricting drought hit. Decisiveness was another strength. Chloe looked at the facts and figures, sure. But 9 times out of 10, she came, she saw, and she went with her gut. She'd made a good living off buying, fixing, and selling businesses. Most of the time. No regrets. That's what Dad used to say when she'd come home after a failure, with a heavy heart and a sometimes empty bank account. He wasn't here this time to help her pick up the pieces and start over. Chloe had walked over to the mill to try and see it through Dad's eyes. He'd left each of his adopted daughters some property: Marnie the wedding chapel, Noelle the house, and Chloe the mill. But when she looked at her inheritance, Chloe saw nothing. No potential, no obstacles. Only the past. And then she'd seen Teddy. Her childish hero worship of Teddy Lincoln had started quickly and resolutely. All he'd done was given a newly adopted, new-to-town kid his place in line to see Santa, and he'd earned her affection for 7 years. He probably could have smashed a mirror and had better luck. It had taken an intervention from her sisters in the summer before high school to make her see what an idiot she was. Too bad that hadn't saved her from one last Teddy-based humiliation. Chloe walked away from Teddy with all the speed of a snowshoe racer, which meant her speed was laughable. Her boots crunched through the thin layer of ice covering 2 feet of snow. She was bundled up like a tourist for a Maine winter, stocking cap, muffler, heavy jacket, gloves. She started to sweat as she cut through the pines toward the rambling white farmhouse and the back gate. She tugged on the latch, which was frozen again. Didn't matter that she'd just done battle with it half an hour ago to escape the Thanksgiving after-meal malaise. It was as frozen as her heart. Dad was gone. Her money was gone. And she'd lost whatever insight and instinct she needed to move on. Chloe slammed her gloved palm against the wood. Here. An arm came over her shoulder. A gloved hand forced the latch free. Chloe, not a fan of horror movies, leapt sideways and fell into a snowdrift. Sorry. Her white knight in snow boots and a lightweight black jacket was Teddy. It was 3rd grade all over again. Her feeling down and alone. Him looking at her with that "put your troubles on my shoulders" smile. The sun glinted off his dark brown hair as he extended a hand to help her up. Teddy was strong and fit and level-headed. Certainly not the type to lose his life savings on a car wash, like her. Certainly not the type to have had a second piece of pecan pie, like her. Certainly not the type to whisper theirs was a forever kind of love in a rundown grist mill, like, wait a minute, that was him. Chloe swatted away Teddy's hand and battled the snow to get to her feet. He leaned a bit to the left, looking at the snowdrift where she'd fallen. Worst snow angel ever. Chloe had a lifetime of please let the ground swallow me whole moments with this man. They came with cheek heating, gut-dropping intensity, and left with soldiering smiles and only in the past decade, snappy comebacks. Only this time her soldier was on leave, no smile, and her snap had been buried with Dad, along with her debt, no comeback. This was the man who'd broken her heart. Repeatedly. This was the man who plagued her dreams with regrets and should have saids. Repeatedly. This was the man she should be telling to get lost. Forever. Her mouth was dry. Snow melted down her back. And words? She couldn't find any. She pushed past him into the backyard. I didn't mean to scare you. He sounded as bone-weary as she was. She whirled. Did you follow me through the woods, Teddy? That's creepy. Romantic, her heart whispered. His dark brown eyes looked as if he hadn't slept well in days. I just wanted to talk. Don't make it sound like those horror movies you hate. He remembered, her heart whispered. Why was Teddy here? If you want to share a kind memory about Dad, I can't do that now. Not on Thanksgiving. Not when Dad had never started a business that failed and Chloe was such a failure. I don't want to. There was the jagged annoyance she was so used to, the emotion she'd mistaken as affection until she was 14, because her biological parents were just like Teddy, disappointed that Chloe existed. She felt like she'd been trying to win them, and him, over for years. We have nothing to talk about. She wasn't going to rehash what a charity case she'd been as a child, as a preteen, as an over-the-moon-in-love teenager. Thanks for opening the gate. Wait, he said before she could turn around. What are you guys doing with the mill now that Harold's gone? The mill is mine and I'm putting it up for sale. She needed the money to get out of debt. Hopefully someone would buy it and demolish the place, and the memories along with it. His gaze dropped to her frozen lips. Only because his were probably frozen, too. Her heart sighed. He yanked his gaze up to meet hers. I want to buy the mill. Chloe took a step back and nearly fell again. She couldn't sell to Theodore Ulysses Lincoln. And then she was running to the house, running away from financial salvation and emotional humiliation. She stumbled up the back steps and into the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. Immediately, she was engulfed with the warm smells of the holiday, turkey, pumpkin pie, coffee. Enfolded in the familiar warmth of the cream-colored shaker cabinets and butcher block counters. Enveloped in the comfort of her two sisters. Mom used to lovingly call them her triplets. 3 girls the same age, adopted by aging parents unable to have children of their own. Marnie had come to them first. She had soft brown eyes that saw too much, and enviably straight, dark brown hair. Then it was Chloe's turn. She'd been plucked from the foster care system in Boston, a child of teen parents. And finally, Noelle had joined them one Christmas, a blonde-haired, green-eyed bundle of kindness and determination. Mom had passed away 3 years ago. Dad 3 months. The Wright triplets found themselves once again without parents, but this time they had each other. Marnie didn't look up from scrubbing the dirty roasting pan in the kitchen sink. What's the rush? Sitting in Mom's place at the kitchen table near the pantry, Noelle glanced up from a cookbook. Have you been making snow angels? No. You have been. Marnie smiled. You always loved rolling around in the snow. She always loved making snow angels with Ted Lincoln, Noelle said gently. And then she did a double take. Is that Ted in the backyard? Chloe laughed somewhat hysterically, keeping her back to the door. Sure, she'd loved him. She'd worshipped him openly until she'd reached high school. And then she'd wrapped herself in pride, and worshipped him from afar. Until prom night her junior year. Where? Marnie wiped her hands with a dish towel and peered out the window. It looked like Ted just closed the back gate. Noelle turned to Chloe while Marnie kept window watch. Are you okay? No, despite feeling like a hot boiler about to blow, Chloe forced herself to remove her hat and scarf slowly. But that's like my new normal. It had nothing to do with Teddy. He's walking toward the street, Marnie reported. He's so tall I can see his head above the fence. I smell donuts. Chloe hung her jacket on a hook and tugged off her boots. Don't we have enough food? I'm sorry. Noelle spoke softly and from the heart. She was the least likely of the three to lose her temper. It's the first holiday without Dad and baking makes me feel better. Ditto, Marnie said. I guess none of us wants to face cleaning out the house. Which is what they'd agreed to do between now and Christmas. Noelle may have inherited the house, but it was Marnie who'd been living there as the primary caregiver through Dad's illness. Noelle had suggested they each clean out a room that was important to them. Noelle had chosen the master bedroom, Marnie Mom's sewing room, and Chloe Dad's office. And yet, none of them wanted to begin the work. The house was as silent as a grave. Until there was a knock on the front door.